And it's still, right, now it's saying it's being recorded. Pause. Here we go. Good to have you with us talking about AI in L&D, moving from talk to action. Bit of background on this. So I'm sharing this presentation with Egle Vinauskaite. Egle and I did a report last year, which I'll talk about in just a second. The key thing is there's an awful lot of chat about AI. There's an awful lot of talk about the potential. What can we actually do with it? And what are people doing with it? That's the question which we're hoping to answer today. We're not going to answer it in full detail, but we want to shine a light on the possibilities and point out where things are moving forward as they are right now in practical terms. So we're not going to do a lot of hand waving. We're going to try to be quite practical about, he says while waving his hands, we're going to try to be quite practical about what you can do with AI. Egle, I've jumped in here and I'm doing all the talking. It occurs to me that I haven't given you a chance to introduce yourself. Your name is on the cover of this report. Do you want to quickly introduce yourself and say who you are? Because I think people know that I'm the chair of the Learning Technologies Conference, but I've just run over you. Go on. Egle,
yeah,
who are you?
I was just super impressed by how well you pronounce my last name.
Oh, stop it.
Hi, everyone. My name is Egle Vinauskaite. I'm a learning and technology strategist and director of the learning innovation consultancy Nodes. And as you know, worked on this report with Don. Yeah, I'm sure by the end of this webinar, you'll get to know me a lot more.
Hopefully they will, and you're certainly worth knowing. You're one of the many people that I suggest to people all the time they should follow in learning more about AI. Our contact details are at the end, and it's a great idea to follow Egle on LinkedIn. This report came out last November. We talked to a bunch of people, and I'll talk about the report more in more detail in a minute. But the key thing about the report is that it showed us where we were then. What we want to do in this webinar is talk about, where we were then, run up to November, but also what's happened since and what's happening now in practical terms. But before we do anything else, I'd like to ask you this question. How do you feel about artificial intelligence in L&D? There's a big box underneath that slide. I'd love you to put your thoughts into that window, please. Let us know, what are your feelings about it? What are your thoughts, but also what are your feelings about it? Carol straight off the block saying it's a huge opportunity. Lior says it's exciting. But it's going past too fast for me to read all this. It's mad. Okay, maybe the future of L&D, says Ivan. Nervous, says Frank. How do you control content? Positive and interest, says Laura. Naive, says Chloe. Claire, not sure I know enough about it just yet. I think that's a really realistic assessment. Excited! Exclamation mark from Marta. And it goes, I'm getting a feeling here, Egle, looking through these as they scroll past really quickly, that there's a combination of excitement and uncertainty. A lot of people saying that they're excited by it and the possibilities, but also a lot of people saying a bit nervous. In fact, Gareth says exactly that, excited and nervous to some degree. Egle, you spent a lot of time in the past. So, look, thank you for that. Keep these thoughts coming. I think this initial reaction is really good. I'm going to make a blog out just of this answers. I'm going to do a word cloud. Egle, what's your thinking about this? Does this reflect this combination of excitement and nervousness, uncertainty? Does that reflect the reaction of people that you've been talking to?
Yes, absolutely. Probably, I'll say the absolute majority of people are feeling like this. It's a technology that's easy to be excited by, but also because of its sheer potential power and use cases, that is, anxiety inducing a bit.
Talking about use cases, Sergio comes up with a very interesting comment, says, big hype, need more use cases. And I hear what you're saying, Sergio, and I think there's a lot to that. The idea that there's an awful lot of this going on, but where's the actual value? What are people actually doing with it? And we'd like to know more about that. And that's what Egle and I are here to try to do. Can be a huge help, says Luca, but creativity remains human. I'm not going to get into the whole, is creativity solely the presence of humans? But I'd absolutely agree that that's what makes us so important in the whole AI debate. In fact, it's probably the last sentence that I'm going to finish on, Luca, today. I say that I'm going to finish on. Actually, most of the talking is going to be Egle. Interested but also concerned, says Julie. and so on. Gosh. Right. Okay. There's lots and lots and lots. Thank you for the articles. Please do keep the resources coming. And that whole business about regulation is super important. We'll bundle those up, and I'll do another blog about those as well, because I think the resources that we surface in these webinars are always super useful. Okay, I'm going to move on from that question now, but I can see that Saeed and Mohammed are still typing. So get your comments in, Saeed and Mohammed, and then we'll move on. Feels so good, Mohammed says. And Saeed says, early stages, a lot of overpromised hype. Yeah, it's a very familiar story. Listen, my global sentiment survey results are coming out. The last day is today and tomorrow for voting. I'm going to ask you to vote, and I'll put a link in the chat in a second to vote for it. Yes, the global sentiment survey, which asks people what they think is hot, completely reflects the idea. You're right, Saeed, that there's a lot of hype there. Well, you can have hype and still have hype for a good reason. So I'm thinking that we have both here. We have noise and signal. Let's try to give some of the signal here, cutting through the noise. When I asked this question, I did a lot of traveling, a lot of talking about AI in the last 6 months. The one word that everybody uses, it doesn't matter if you're in Las Vegas or Kuala Lumpur or Prague or Berlin, the word that everyone uses, even if their first language isn't English, is overwhelm. I just feel there's too much going on. It's like I'm drowning under a sea of hype and information. So we're going to try to cut through the overwhelm and try to make it useful for you, try to be useful to you to understand AI. Right. 3 things we're going to look at. I'm going to go through, right, AI and L&D. What did our report say? In around the middle of that, we're going to pick up, Egle's going to go through a lot of more detail about that, and we're going to talk about the challenge to L&D, and I'll wrap up with some thoughts about what's coming up in 2024. People are dropping questions in. Please do keep dropping those questions into the box under the slides. We'll try to deal with those in the end. It is going to be tight on time. Now, at the end, there is of the slide deck, there is a resources section. We've got 2 QR codes to link in with me and with Egle. There is also about 10 slides of just resources. And at the end of this, on the wrap-up slide, on the wrap-up layout that you'll see, we're going to end up with the opportunity to download this slide deck in PDF format straight away. So don't worry about missing anything. You'll be able to download the slides. You'll be able to watch the recording tomorrow. You're covered. Let's start off with the state of play. Here's the report. That links you through to the LinkedIn article where we talked about it. There's a link at the end which will take you through to the actual article itself. In fact, I'm going to give you that now. So here's the report. Here's a link that goes through to, sorry, not the article, a link that goes through to the report itself. AI in L&D, the state of play, looking at what were people doing with it when we interviewed them and surveyed them. Egle did a bunch of interviews and we surveyed 185 people. And you can see from that pie chart that the majority of them, about 60% of them, were employers, either in the not-for-profit or the for-profit sector, and the rest were a combination of vendors, freelancers, and others. 33 of those people were in what we call key roles. That's people who were in charge of a learning and development department for a large organization. So they had considerable responsibility, and I was very interested in what they had to say. Was it different from other people? One of the key findings was that AI has got off to a slow start in L&D, or at least by last November it had to. We asked people how much progress had they made. We gave them a multiple choice question with 6 answers. Those 6 answers split quite nicely into 2 lots of 3. Either people were doing nothing, or they were just exploring it, or they were actually doing something with AI. And if we split those answers out, this is what it looks like. The blue column is the employers. That's 60% of people in the not-for-profit and for-profit sector. And look at them. 45% of those people were doing nothing or just exploring it. Now remember, this survey is for people who are interested in AI. We say, do you want to come and vote? It's a self-selecting population. So this is not the general population. These should be people who are more excited about it. It typically was from the answers we got. And yet even amongst that group of people, 45% of people weren't doing very much, if anything, with it. 45% of the employers. I think that was a really interesting starting point. We're off to a slow start, but people are clear about what they want. We gave them a list of things they could choose from. about what benefit they expected to get from using AI in L&D. That's the list on the left-hand side, you can see there. And you can see that by far and away, the most important thing, or the greatest benefit people thought they'd get from using AI, at least in October and November last year, was creating learning content, the top thing on the list there. The second thing is improving efficiency. We'll look more at that in a second. And the third thing is personalization. Personalization is already becoming quite a strong theme, I think, for this year. What I found fascinating about this is look where skills lie on this list. There's been a lot of talk, and you can use AI very effectively for understanding the skills of your organization, but that wasn't, I'm not saying it wasn't what people were doing with it, it wasn't even an expected benefit that people were looking at. And that result, by the way, was the same whether people were amongst the key roles in the large organizations or any employer at all. It was more or less the same. So skills were not, at that point, a key reason for using AI. Another thing is, let's look at what people meant when they said improving efficiency. Improving efficiency, I expected people to say things like, well, I'm going to use it to summarize meetings, to allow me to compare documents, all the things that take up quite a lot of time. But actually, we did a word cloud of the comments of people who were using AI and who had selected that. And this is what they said they were doing with AI. They were using it to generate content with ChatGPT, if you look at that. So even when people talk about efficiency, they're talking about efficiency in their existing processes of creating content. Content dominates how people see the benefits of using AI. Interestingly, well, I think it's interesting. Earlier this week, I put up a blog on LinkedIn asking people, okay, what are you doing with AI? Egle and I put this report out some time ago. Just let me know, what are you doing now? I went through the list of the responses. There were about 40 responses. And of those, I categorized them into these groups of what people were using it for. Admin efficiency was one of the things. Assessment, interestingly, was there. A lot of people were talking about using it for a chatbot, sometimes for coaching, sometimes for other things as well. I've separated out coaching and simulation. Content was still about 40% of the answers were talking about content in one form or another, but it was quite subtle what they were doing with it. And Egle, what I think this shows for me, the answers we got to this query, and it's very unscientific, just asking people what they are doing with it. But for me, I get the gut feeling here that people are moving on with what they're doing with AI in L&D. Is that fair enough from what you're seeing people do at the moment?
When I look at that list, it still looks quite similar to what we had.
Yeah.
I guess the difference might be in terms of how far along people are in doing these things, because as we'll see, saying that we're creating content means very different things.
Sure, it means a lot of things.
Well, as simulations, personalization, and so on.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, so for me, it represents a slight amount of progress because I've looked at the answers in some detail. But yeah, perhaps it's not. Perhaps I'm being over optimistic. Perhaps the progress isn't very great. I'm going to stop talking, have a sip of water. I'm going to ask everyone in the room very quickly. We're talking enthusiastically about using AI for lots of things, but I know from talking to people that they anticipate barriers. So please let me know in the chat there, what barriers do you see to working with AI in L&D? And okay, gosh. Okay, so a couple of answers already around data here. Localization of generated content, that's really interesting, Patrick. I see intellectual property, data protection, Marina saying confidence security, says Stephen. Corporate IT control, accuracy, says Sarah. Corporate barriers to security, facilitation. Okay, there's a lot of things. Validation in capital letters from Zach. Security from Sahid. So there's a lot of themes coming through here. But I quite like Kirsten's. Data security, client confidence in data security. So two things there. The reality of the security and the perception of the security. I think that's a really, really strong answer, Kirsten. Thank you for bringing that up. You know, I asked this question to the audience here in Paris. I did a talk yesterday. And I asked this question to the audience, and I said, in one word, what's the barrier? and they came up with it just felt so good: truth, understanding, and time. And it felt like a sort of French manifesto: truth, understanding, and time, like fraternité, liberté, and égalité. And I think that summarizes actually pretty well what the issues are here. That we want it to work. We have issues with trusting it, and also we have issues with the amount of time it's going to take us just to get to understand it. Egle, these are great thoughts coming around here. How it works, Mandy says, and cost bias, says Keith, and I think all of these are these are all great answers that we've got coming through. I'm going to close this down in a second, so please don't put anything more in here. Gaynor and Julie coming in with their thoughts. Truth, understanding, and time. Yes. Egle, I'm gonna hand the baton, I think, over to you to carry us forward here, to talk about because you did a lot of work looking at the barriers that came up in the survey and what people said there. So take us through it. What are the barriers?
Yeah. Just reflect on the truth, understanding, and time, which is a good motto for life as well. So looking at the chat again, a lot of the same themes were coming up. And when we did our survey, we managed to categorize all of those, probably several hundred of blockers, into three categories: broadly technology, business, and individual barriers. And going into each of them one by one, in case, first of all, so you know that other people are also facing those barriers, but also to see what barriers maybe you haven't thought about that may be relevant in your organization as well. So obviously, technology barriers and data privacy and security is a major one, just like in our chat just now, which is about sharing proprietary or sensitive data with AI tools, which includes confidentiality of people's data and inputs into AI, because we need to remember that HR and L&D technology, we work with sensitive data, so this is especially relevant for us. Potential data breaches and whether AI tools comply with data protection regulations such as GDPR, which is something that came out of some of my interviews with learning leaders based in Europe. The second one was IT security, which is about long processes to ensure that new AI tools meet the organization's IT security standards, meaning that some organizations cannot use these tools because they may meet these requirements sometime in the future, but just the sheer amount of work required to validate that as a blocker. Integration and compatibility, this is something that I think is going to be coming up increasingly, especially as we keep talking about skills and skills analytics. This is about data transfer between systems. So is the taxonomy the same? How can we analyze this data from different systems if it's not aligned? And finally, quality and efficacy of the outputs, text, video, audio, especially in non-English languages, and working with highly specialized content. This came through quite clearly in our survey, that outside of the English-speaking Western world and the generic topics, generative AI is falling short. Now, when it comes to business barriers, obviously cost is a big one, and it has several facets. The first one is the cost of software licenses and tokens. The second one is the cost of software developers and software development to create custom applications and integrations as you're putting together your suite of applications. And finally, which is something that many people mentioned as well, is the time investment to become proficient with AI so that you can actually start deriving benefit and return on investment from it. The second one is compliance, which is about restrictions, but funnily enough, it's an interesting point that a lot of people mentioned compliance restrictions in their organizations, but then there were a lot of people who said that it is just not knowing what's the acceptable use. Then we have obviously ethics and copyright, especially as it relates to copyright of AI-generated outputs. And companies are afraid of potential IP infringement. Then communicating business value is also coming up, especially among our key leader respondents. It's about difficulty in moving from a fun tool to actually a tool that can create business value in the organization and making that business case to the senior leadership. And finally, the good old organizational resistance, which is addressing anything from people's fears of job displacement, distrust in technology, fear of change, fear of doing something wrong, but also management, the lack of awareness among the senior management about what kind of benefits AI might bring, and it makes it quite difficult to get going with AI adoption when there is some pushback from management. And finally, individual barriers. So trust, just like truth, is something that is always coming out strong from the very beginning, from early last year. This is the one word that people keep using. What's the barrier? It is trust. So it's about accuracy and reliability of AI-generated content. So both factual accuracy, credibility of the source content that AI models are trained on, potential biases, especially what kind of content was not included in the training of the model, and even when we go outside of generative AI and into say more algorithmic AI, it is about the efficacy of content recommendations for people when we're using these AI powered content recommendation tools. And obviously, as I'm sure many of you have discovered, that checking and QAing that content is also a big thing. So just compounds the trust issue. And then time constraints, which I call time to mastery, the time it requires for people to get to something valuable. Choice, overwhelmed by choice, again mentioned in our chat. And finally, knowledge and skills of both AI and AI specifically in the context of learning, how to make the most of it and support learning process, not just I know how to use generative AI and I create content. So these are our barriers. And if we think about how people right now in L&D are using generative AI, you would see that mostly the use cases are within LXD, learning experience design. And obviously, L&D is not just LXD, but because LXD has this content generation, content creation component, this is one of the more obvious use cases. And if we look at the graph of how people are using it, we have some discovery, like a little bit of discovery. We have quite a lot more strategy and design, a lot of using a generative AI for delivery, meaning content creation, and then very little action at the very end with evaluation, following up, iteration, and things like that. So this isn't surprising to me, because it probably resembles what has been happening with this process even before AI. So this all makes sense. We have been spending a lot of time on content production and definitely not enough time on discovery and evaluation. And right now, this is the good part. I'm going to go into more detail
for each of these boxes.
Exactly. But I want to stress that these are not necessarily best practices. They are common practices. So what I'm saying is that the use cases that I mentioned are the use cases that a lot of people in L&D are using generative AI for, but they're not necessarily the best or most effective use cases. They might be, but I'm not making the judgment here.
Okay, but to be fair, could we also say, look, there's a bunch of use cases coming up. Thank you very much, Egle. It's too early for us to know. If these are a great use of AI or not. And it may become more apparent over time, given how fast everything happens. That might be in the next few months. It might be by the end of the year.
Exactly. So as you can see on the left, you'll see common practice. On the right, you will see use cases that were mentioned by usually one person in the survey that I think are quite interesting and more inspired uses. So starting from AI-enabled discovery, a lot of people are using it to research content and to understand the topic better. And some of the more interesting use cases include profiling people and creating user personas. writing scripts for user interviews, specifically for user interviews, not for like not learning scripts. Distilling knowledge and skills required to reach the learning objective. So, for example, if you have some sort of a learning need, trying to understand exactly what is needed to achieve that objective, AI can help with that, and exploring nuance and different perspectives in the content. So not just about okay, what do I need to know about, say, negotiation, but okay, these are the frameworks. What's the other side of it? What is the critique?
Egle, if I can make an observation, and I love this series of slides, by the way, it's almost like very often the right-hand column is like clarity for the left-hand column. It's like the left-hand column is a good idea, but here, look, if you really do it properly, you can find this and that. It's almost like AI is this fog, and out of the fog, as we get closer, these things materialize as better formed shapes. So it's almost like it's not a clear dividing line, but if you really go to town on this, you can really start doing some interesting stuff. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just think that's a common theme we've got here, that as people use AI more, the interesting use cases are going to be emerging. Sorry, back to you, Egle.
Yeah, there's interesting discourse in the chat about whether AI should be used for creating personas, which I think is a good chat. Okay, so AI-enabled learning strategy and design. Commonly, people are using AI for brainstorming ideas, and this is a great use case of AI, in my personal opinion. So it's content topics, learning activities, scenarios that we might use. Then a lot of people are creating a high-level course outline for the course, just pretty much what could it look like, and generating quiz questions and assessments. And among the lesser and more rarely used use cases are using AI as a thought partner. And there is a difference between a brainstorming buddy and a thought or sparring partner, because brainstorming is one way, but some people are using it in a two-way conversation to really interrogate their ideas and to get that feedback, get that second person on the project, especially when learning designers or often people in L&D, they have very small teams and they don't have other people to discuss and think things through. So they're using AI for that. Then personalized feedback on scenario questions or uploads is an interesting use case. And finally, using AI to generate relevant examples, metaphors, case studies, projects, for the learning program. Delivery, this is where a lot of action is taking place. So obviously content writing and scripting, say video scripts or scenarios. Translation is something that I was quite surprised at how many people are actually using AI translation and replacing actual translators. Creating videos, mostly talking heads. Synthetic audio to create course voiceovers, although one of the way they're used is that they are being created to as placeholder audio sometimes to show the solution to stakeholders and get them more immersed, to get more quality feedback from them. And finally, generating images for slides on courses. So I'm sure many of you have played around with that. Now, in terms of more interesting use cases, we have simplifying subject matter expert content, especially if it's technical, just making it accessible to people who don't have the background a subject matter expert has. Manipulating content into different formats. So creating slides from document or creating a document and then a summary, a resource with some of the key points, things like that. Rewriting procedural or compliance content for different roles. So, for example, if you have a very long procedural or compliance manual, making it relevant for one role, say a back office, front office, that sort of thing. And using third-party AI tools to edit video footage using a text-based interface. So it's not talking heads, but actual video editing, which is sounds quite exciting. And finally, evaluation and follow-up. Funnily enough, no common practices. And out of the few people who actually reported that they were doing something in this space, the use cases were conducting a sentiment analysis of qualitative feedback, so pasting all of the responses and seeing what kind of sentiment comes out, suggesting improvements based on insights extracted from that feedback, identifying opportunities to personalize content. So again, using AI in a bit of a sparring partner capacity, and analyzing and interrogating data sets for insights into user behavior. So that if that is once you actually have data, which is not just qualitative data. So this is where we are, and of course, as I said, the majority of use cases are in learning experience design, but we also have some highlights outside of that. So specifically, that's learning personalization, using AI for learning strategy, and administrative support. So very quickly, what we're seeing here is with learning personalization, we have content curation, which is usually using AI-enabled LMS functionality or third-party tools. Adaptive learning, again, powered by third-party tools, where each person is served content based on their assessed level of knowledge, progress, relevance. You know how it works. Information lookup. So the survey was, we did the survey before Microsoft Copilot came out, and now it's become quite wide, if not widespread, and a lot of organizations are experimenting with it. But generally speaking, information lookup as in terms of using AI for internal knowledge management. And finally, skills practice, which is another flavor of personalizations where you're personalizing the experience the person has, because they are responding in natural language, and they're in their natural language. They're getting feedback, which is super personalized based on their response. And so they are getting this very personalized skill practice experience. And mostly this looked like coaching bots and conversation simulations. Learning strategy was an interesting one, because on one hand, we had using generative AI for learning strategy, specifically asking, using prompts related to skills gap analysis or knowledge gap analysis, training requirements, business alignment, for example, saying that, okay, so this is our business strategy. What could our learning strategy look like to support this business vision and strategy? These kind of prompts. But also we had skills intelligence, which is obviously using these new generation skills intelligence tools, identifying what skills are associated with certain roles, mapping the skills that are present in your organization, adopting skills frameworks and using them to make strategic L&D decisions. And finally, internal mobility, which is enabling of skilling and reskilling by matching people with potential job roles that will support their development across the organization. So, well, not yet. Administrative support. I think I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here. A lot more use cases are in the report, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. But my question to you is, does this reflect what you're doing with AI and L&D? And I've been speaking for at least 10 minutes. Don, you probably already know the answer to this question as people were posting their replies and reacting. You're on mute.
I would have hoped that after the pandemic, I'd have learned to unmute myself, but apparently not. I am really looking forward to people's feedback on this question of, does this reflect what you're doing with AI and L&D? And look, you know, Bethan is saying some of it, and I'd also like to know. So please put your answers in the big box underneath the question there. And I'm sorry if I was late getting to that. I had to unmute myself very unprofessionally. Lior kindly says, "You're on mute" is everybody's middle name now. Thank you, Lior. I appreciate that. Listen, while people are typing their answers into, does this reflect what you're doing? There were a couple of several interesting points. Charles Jennings saying, look, hang on, there's a big focus here on content and the program mindset and the course. Surely the interesting stuff with AI lies outside that. I would agree, absolutely. Charles,
stepping on my toes a bit here, Charles.
We're trying to reflect what people are actually doing at the moment, but we'll talk a bit about that, I hope, at the end if we have time. big question from Jana saying, does anybody have any examples of these tools for personalization? I'd like to know more about that, and other people agreeing. And I'd love to help with that. So contact me on LinkedIn if I can support you on that, I'm sure. Meanwhile, the answers are flooding in to the question, does it reflect it? Well, not using AI yet, says Carol. You're not alone, Carol. Most people are in that position. Some of it, says Valerie, and actually that's a really common theme in the answers. A lot of people are saying some of it is. To some extent, says Deborah. This webinar reflects it, finding out what everybody else thinks before jumping in with both feet, says James. And I think that's a pretty common position from people I'm talking to in L&D right now. There's that gradual moving forward, but nobody's going to jump in and run the risk of crashing into one of those barriers we talked about earlier, especially around data and security, unless they were sure about it. More or less, one of my colleagues has developed an AI tool for the assessment of digital micro-credentials. Keith, I'd love to know more about that. There we go. So there's the general theme here, Egle, in the answers is, yeah, look, we're doing most of this stuff, and there are pockets of examples of new stuff going on. Zach using it to analyze, to assess sales skills. And coaching and one-to-one coaching sessions are helpful, says Olga. Coaching is one of the areas I'm going to talk about in a minute as what I see as one of the areas it's going to be big in 2024. Examples of how to write in plain English are great, says Julie. Would hope the human who wrote the original text would learn from the AI suggestions rather than relying on AI always to do it for you. I would hope that people will always use AI-generated text as the first draft. I've done a lot of stuff with ChatGPT, and I always find that what it produces is very beige and dull and definitely requires human input. We've got about 20 minutes or so left, so should we push on, Egle?
Yes. Okay. I'm glad that the answers kind of reflect what I just talked about, because then the slides that follow are not obsolete, and I can make my case, which is very much in line with what Charles Jennings was arguing in the chat.
Everyone who's just typing into that box at the bottom, I'm going to ask you to transfer your thoughts over to the general chat and observations. We don't want to lose them, but I want to move on, and I'm going to press a button which is going to make that box disappear. Do you want to keep going, Egle, with the challenge to L&D?
Yes. So if you look at all of these use cases that we just talked about, a lot of the AI activity in L&D is happening at the content level. But I'm personally most excited about the opportunities in using AI for skill development and strategy, because if you think about this sort of stacked pancake model, this is
nice.
That helps me think about it. So we have obviously content at the very bottom. Then we can upgrade that to skill development, and part of it is performance support. And then we can use AI for learning strategy and then supporting business strategy. So if you think about where we are and where we want to go, we'd probably want to take advantage of what AI offers to us in terms of skill development. Now let's put a pin in this and come back to it later. In the meantime, looking at the bigger picture. Because there are three forces converging at the same time right now. So one is AI-enabled workforce intelligence, tight labor market, and an accelerated pace of change. So AI-enabled workforce intelligence, by that I mean, now we have the technology, if not fully developed, but at least in development, which would enable that more sophisticated understanding and intelligence on.
Okay. I don't know if that is just my audio. Chloe, can you let me know in the chat? Has Egle cut off completely, or is she still there? Egle, can you say something?
I'm back.
Okay, you're back. Egle froze. Everyone's paying attention, Egle. That's the good news. Now you can come back on. There's a.
Did you?
We only missed a second. You were on that slide. You were just finishing, and you're moving on to the next slide. Carry on.
Anyway, let's just move on. Tight labor market is another thing that keeps coming up in all of people processes, for people circles. It has two facets. The first one, it is quite hard to find people with the required skills these days. And on the other hand, the people who have those skills, they want really serious personal and professional development. And finally, we have this accelerated pace of change, which is in a large part due to technology innovation, but also hybrid work, transition to green technologies and so on. So very many macro factors that are making it so that there are massive competitive pressures in the market, and organizations need to be agile and deploy their skills quickly to where they're needed. So, for example, from customer support to something like data analysis, right? And even outside of these, let's look at some of the recent reports from the last 2 weeks, where IBM reported that 69% of their respondent CEOs see broad benefits from generative AI across the organization, but only a third of their executives, their C-suite, think that the organization has the in-house expertise to adopt generative AI. Then BCG, Boston Consulting Group, they reported that 89% of executives rank AI and generative AI as a top 3 tech priority this year, but only 6% of companies have managed to train more than a quarter of their people on generative AI tools. So there's this big gap between the business vision and what the business wants and how it wants to compete in the market, and what the situation with skills is. So the fundamental challenge to L&D's role is that technology is affecting not just L&D, but the business that L&D serves. And we, of course, are in our circles, we speak with a lot of learning people, but there's this whole world outside of it that the organization itself, any organization, is being affected by at the macro level by what we're talking about at the micro level. So what is L&D going to do? We're at a crossroads. And the question is, are we going to continue focusing on content, or are we going to move towards developing actual skills that the business needs to compete in the market, especially at a time when the business is changing and the competitive environment is changing as well? So with that in mind, let's look into what this year might look like, and I'm handing you over back to Don.
Wow. Hats off to Egle. A great setup there. A lot of content. Look, I never predict the future. It's a mug's game. You can only get it wrong. I'm going to predict the future. I'm going to just look at 3 things that I think are going to be big in 2024 as a result of AI being used. Very, very top level stuff here. A lot of you will already be familiar with these, a lot of you in quite some detail. But I hope that these 3 things will just be highlights to think about this year. None of them is about content. Firstly, I think AI is going to be used for improved efficiency. Let's have a quick look at what that means. If you're not following Ethan Mollick already on LinkedIn, do so. He's an associate professor in the US whose job is looking at AI. And that's all he does every day. And last November, he wrote, "I can't keep up anymore." Literally, he feels like the rest of us, if that makes you feel any better. But one great thing Ethan does is look at that you haven't got time to look at. And actually, Frank put a great quote in here in the text saying, how do we spend the time without the budget to find out what's actually working? Follow people like Ethan who are doing some of the work. He goes through the different co-pilots available, which are embedded in Microsoft applications already. In other words, these are helping people be much more efficient in the workplace. What that means is that, what means 2 things. Firstly, people are going to get used to just doing things differently at work. But secondly, areas where they might have expected training or input from L&D won't exist anymore. These are all things with PowerPoint, Excel, not so much, Word especially, where people can now do things different and better. And it exists. And if you've got 365, it's in your organization right now. He talks about how managers can now do things, very simple things with Word. Well, actually, they're simple to do, but they are complicated to do. If you're a human, they take time. Compare documents, summarize documents, and so on, all of which can now be done efficiently, at least to a first draft, by a machine. That means that changes our role. Another thing which we can do, which is not about producing content so much with GPTs, but about accessing knowledge in the organization and making sense of it and putting it out for performance support or other reasons, is to create your own GPT. I tried this with my book, learning technologies in the workplace. I put it in. I was blown away initially by how comprehensive it seemed as a way of accessing that book and asking it questions. I then was able to uncover issues and problems with its interpretation. I won't go into the detail. That's a whole separate and quite funny story in its own right. The point is, whatever else we use in these business of improving efficiencies, whether it's those co-pilots that Ethan's talking about, or whether it's using your own proprietorial material in-house, you've got to have a human in the loop. Otherwise, you run the risk of that trust issue we were talking about earlier. We've talked about coaching slightly in the chat. It is one of the things that people are now using AI for more. It is definitely one of the things that's going to become more prominent this year. I've been following this since 2018. There's no doubt that the use of machinery to help us with coaching is potentially huge. There's a spectrum of ways in which you can use it, from we're not going to use it at all, right the way through to welcome to your robot, this is now your coach. Somewhere in the middle, I think, is where we work. There will still, of course, be entirely human-based coaching for the people for whom that works best. But as soon as you move to the right of the spectrum, things start to scale exponentially. There is a real problem on the right-hand side of the spectrum where your coach is a bot. If your coach is a bot, there are serious issues when it gets things wrong, and if the person is too reliant on it. So my view is that we're going to see sensible people. We'll see huge claims made on the right-hand side of the spectrum, and sensible people focusing around this area here where AI is supporting a human, with possibly the other way that the AI leads and the human supports for delivering coaching. The promise here is of being able to deliver high quality learning at scale without the focus being on content necessarily. I'm skimming over these things. Each one of them could be a webinar in itself. And that's certainly true of skills-based organizations. If you weren't familiar with this phrase this time last year, you certainly are now, because it's dominating a lot of thinking. It's not new. I want to talk you through a sort of a pattern of how the data sits in the background with a very simple schematic and showing you what the end point is. And I'm going to share my skepticism about it and my hopes about it. The question that skills-based organization tries to answer is, can this person do the job? In a classic job interview, you don't know. Generally, people's biases come into play with the interview, and generally the person you're interviewing lies. I'm not making this up. There are numbers that show that most people lie on their curriculum vitae. So how do we get around this? And how do we make sure that we can find out, can people do a job? The idea is that you've got a dictionary of skills which you relate to your job profiles. That tells you what skills you need. You then work out, well, what skills have we got? I'm glossing over a lot of very important detail here, you understand. This tells us on the left, what do we need? On the right, what have we got? You put them together, you have a skills database. That shows you where your skills gaps are. If you align that then with your learning content, then you've got a skills and learning database. What you've got, what you need, what the gaps are, and how you get across the gap. If you put all that stuff together with the HR system data, then you've got an organizational skills database. It shows you not just people as individuals, but people as they relate together in teams, in departments, and it gives you an idea of the skills audit of the organization. Where are you strong? Where are you weak? And then, and this is the key bit, when you feed that organizational skills information back into the HR systems, then you have a skills-based organization. You'll appreciate this is a very, very simple schematic based on what I've seen with organizations who are doing this, where the schematics are huge and very complicated. When you've got HR systems using the skills-based organization, these things now become based on skills rather than on some of the other things, supposition, bad data, and so on. And the idea is, the promise is, this enables us to run our organization much more effectively, be more agile, and so on, right the way through to forming a team, so you get the right people on the team. I have serious concerns about this because I think that the role of AI in this, which is in that central bit of the skills dictionary, has been oversold. And although I've seen some very good case studies of people using it in niche areas, my concern is that it may not be possible to produce a reliable skills dictionary using AI. If it isn't, the whole thing doesn't work, because we saw at the beginning that's what things rely on. But if it does work, then this is truly revolutionary and it enables us to do a good job. However, even so, people are more than just skills. And that's a separate issue for another webinar at another time. Those are the three things which I think are going to be big for us in this year. Now I want to come back to content. And I want to ask this question before we wrap up and jump into, for the last 5 seconds, some Q&A. When I started doing this job in the 1980s, your job was to create and deliver content, either personally in a classroom or in a book. We still focus on content in L&D. Suppose you're working 8 hours a day, and suppose 6 hours of those days you spend delivering content. We know that you can now reduce that time to produce the content down to 1 hour at most, almost certainly. So my question to you is, and to anybody at L&D, you've now got 5 hours spare. What do you do with them? And we don't have to answer this now. We haven't got time. It's a rhetorical question. But if the answer is produce more content, I don't think that's a good answer. I think the world doesn't need more content. I think the world needs some of the other things that Egle was talking about, the use of our skills, the use of AI in strategy, in understanding the organization, in helping the organization shift its attitudes towards a different type of L&D. So very quickly, I'm going to take you back. Here are my thoughts. Love it or hate it, AI is here to stay, and it's only improving and getting more sophisticated. Don't panic about AI, but for goodness sake, please start with it. The tools have changed, but the job hasn't. Our job remains to help people and organizations excel. To do that, we've got to change our image of ourselves and to the organization. We are not content producers. We are change agents. And finally, everything that starts as a technology, whether it's aircraft at war, the steam engine, or anything else, it starts as a differentiator and it ends as a commodity. Sooner or later, something that got you to here, somebody else gets to there. And what makes the difference is always the people. That's why L&D is so important today and will remain increasingly important. Right. Thank you. It's a whistle-stop tour. We got through a lot of content there. Couple of QR codes, links on the left-hand side. If you want to download that slide deck, bottom left-hand corner, you should be able to click there and download the slides. We have got a whole lot of questions. We're not going to be able to get through them. Will we change to development and learning, says Jana or Yana? Yes, probably. I think we will, or perhaps we'll drop the learning altogether. Perhaps we'll move to a performance department. Egle, we've got a whole suite of questions here. And we've got 2 minutes, and I feel performance, Avinash, I agree, that's where we should be. I want to jump over to what Rob said. Rob said one thing earlier on. So again, I want to give a shout out to Frank. One of the challenges we face is the budget to explore the art of the possible in the face of no existing use cases and solutions. Egle and I are working on that. Our job is to try to go out and talk to people who are doing stuff and bring it back to you. We've got an update report coming about. We'll get that out to you, let's say late March, early April, which will be an update on the last report saying what's actually happening, because the lack of use cases is really hampering things. Also want to give a shout out, as I say, to Rob. Rob saying that he's nervous about AI creating personas without controlling the data. This touches on the whole security and trust issue. Egle, do you want to just give your thoughts on that very quickly?
Yeah, so as with anything, whatever you use AI for, you need to interrogate what you get out of it. And obviously, you need to be sensible about what you put in. So there is, usually when people describe how they're using personas, they're not saying that we're just feeding all of the data and we are just getting these very precise personas that we use to develop these, to make very, very important decisions on, but like expensive decisions on. What they're saying is that I cannot get in touch. Like my client is not giving me 5 people to speak with to understand what the day-to-day of these, say, consultants or lawyers or whoever is very super busy people are. And I need to understand what their context might look like. So I may input some context about the organization, what they do, what the roles are, what I know and what I can share with AI. And then I'm going to ask AI to fill in the rest so I can understand perhaps the pain points. What does the day look like? What are their main concerns? So that sort of thing, to get empathy, but not necessarily make pretty much create a business out of a persona created by AI. So I think that's what they meant.
I think people are aware of the issues. They should remain aware of the issues. And we had somebody, I can't remember who earlier, raised the point about somebody wrote something as a man, got talked to ChatGPT as a man and then talked to it as a woman and found that the answers were very different. I'm going to just put that link into here. If we forget about to be concerned about the role or the assumptions that exist in the databases that AIs are trained on, please do have a look at that link I just dropped in. I'm sorry I can't remember because the comments were going past too fast, who raised the point, but it's a fascinating issue around how the assumptions that we make in language ourselves, which are fed into the AI, which then repeats back to us. And sometimes it's a rather ugly and distorting mirror. So let's be aware always of the data that we're training AI on. I don't believe that AI is biased, but I absolutely know that people are, and we create the data that AI is trained on. And so the result is the same. Egle,
one last thing, because I was following Rob's
Yes.
reply, that is still risky, got to keep the human in the loop. Yes, humans should be in the loop in most cases that I can think of. Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. Thank you for that phrase, Rob. Human in the loop, absolutely crucial phrase to always keep in mind. Egle, I love chatting about this stuff with you. You always bring so much to it, and I always feel like I know so much more after we've had a chat, so thank you. I want to also thank everybody in the room for bringing your contributions and your thoughts so much here. We've got Chloe on the call. She's been doing great work in the back end, just dealing with some technical stuff. Chloe is going to do some summaries of the chats that we've had and put them into some blogs. I don't think it'll be one blog. I think it'll be multiple blogs. And it may well also be that some of these questions that we've asked today and we've been unable to answer will go into some blogs as well and see if we can stimulate some more discussion. And I might put some of those on LinkedIn and try to find answers to them as well. It's been a really powerful hour for me, hearing everybody, hearing Egle. I hope it's been useful for you. Egle, any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Sorry, I was just looking at the hashtag Egle fan, so got a bit distracted.
We're all Egle fans. We're all Egle fans. Any final thoughts for everyone in the room, Egle?
Don't think about the final destination. Think about, first of all, what kind of foundation, understand the foundation that you currently have in your organization for AI, what kind of data you have, what kind of tools people are using, what kind of best practices or common practices have emerged in your organization. So look into that and start there. And always, always, always start with a problem, not the tool. Cannot say this enough. AI is going to get you places where you don't want to go if you just use it aimlessly and try to find a use case for it. Start with a problem.
It's a phrase we've used many times on these webinars since 2007, and as long as there is technology and learning, we'll continue to use it. Start with the problem. Egle, thank you so much for that and your other insights today. Thanks to everybody in the room. I'm going to close the doors now. Please do follow those links. Please do link in with me and Egle. And look, it's the final 36 hours of the Global Sentiment Survey campaigning, so please do vote. I'm shamelessly asking you to vote on my survey to let me know what you think will be hot this year. Honestly, the result is a foregone conclusion. We know what the answer is, but I need your votes anyway, because I need your comments as well. One vote is what's hot. The other really, really interesting question is, what are your challenges this year? And I really want to hear those as well. So I'm going to hope to hear from you in the survey. In the meantime, hope you have a great rest of your day, and I look forward to being in touch. Bye for now from me and Egle.